reality of climate change is we all are abusers.
Yes.
So we all should contribute.
In case you hadn't heard, there's a big environment conference this week in Egypt. After saying that he wouldn't attend, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is now there, possibly related to the fact that his predecessor, Boris Johnson, is also there. Boris Johnson is warning this morning that a corrosive cynicism is jeopardising efforts to wean the world off fossil fuels. In a moment, we'll speak to a man who's been to more than his fair share of COP meetings. That's Tom Rivet-Carnac. But first, let's speak to Jamaica's Minister of Tourism, Edmund Bartlett, who is with us here in the studio. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Good morning.
How would you say, for people who don't know, who've not been following particular countries and their kind of climate change fate, how has Jamaica and therefore the tourism industry in Jamaica been affected by climate change?
Well, let's begin on the basis that the environment is a product. And so the sustainable building of capacity to manage the environment is to secure the product, and therefore is to ensure that there is tourism. So the issues of climate change represents in our mind the big elephant in the room in terms of sustainable tourism, and particularly for small island states that are highly dependent on tourism, but are also vulnerable because of their geophysical location being susceptible to climate events, hurricanes, extreme flooding and other types of climate action. So we have a serious responsibility, one, to preserve ourselves, and secondly, to respond quickly to all the mitigation, adaptation, and or management capacity building arrangements that are critical to maintaining the sustainability of our destination. So tourism for us, therefore, being the driver of our economy, dictates that we become climate sensitive and become seriously adapted to the process of managing.
Now, I went on holiday to Jamaica 22 years ago. What if I were to go there now, what would I notice in terms of any impact that climate change has had on Jamaica?
Well, first of all, I think that you would see that some of the beaches that you might have enjoyed a little more extensive land arrangement would be a little denuded. We have had to be enriching constantly to preserve and maintain the integrity of the beaches. You would also see that there have had to be special, what shall I say, adaptive and mitigational methods utilized to trap and keep, for example, sand and to keep the integrity of beaches in some areas. Yes.
Goodness me. And the tourism that you currently operate, is it all sustainable, or are different bits of tourism sustainable to different levels?
Well, the effort is to try to enable sustainability in all areas. The difficulty that you have is the resource capabilities that exist within the areas. The hard cold facts are that there are some things you can't manage simply because of where you are located. You buy tourists from the metropole, they fly to you or they sail to you, so there are carbon implications for that. You can't deal with that. You bring foreign investors in, sometimes you manage the process to enable them to conform to the rules that you have, but there are certain types of materials that have to come in, there are certain types of technology that may have to also be applied, which may not be all eco-friendly. So you have to balance all of that because you are not the final producer of these critical inputs that are vital to the industry itself.
Tell us what you think about this idea of loss and damage, for in other words, payments from developed countries to those who are less developed and who've been affected catastrophically, we've seen on the news recently, by climate change. Do you support this idea of loss and damage payments?
Well, the L&D discussions are very strong, and I feel very strongly myself about it because we are the real minimal users of the victims. Yeah, we are. Vanadu, for example, with a 0.0001% is likely to be totally inundated and perhaps destroyed by climate change actions, particularly high rising water levels. Maldives, for example, and we in the Caribbean, Jamaica in particular, we're really, really minimal users, but we are the victims. So it is correct that those who are the main polluters should pay, and that the mitigation, the climate fund should be strengthened by specific contribution. Now I know that the ambitions of COP27 is to secure the $600 billion that was promised, and certainly the $100 billion that was earmarked for the SIDS, which is not coming. But I think that we perhaps need to be a little more ambitious in terms of dealing with it, and to look specifically at how can we, for example, develop an environment tip or a sustainability tip, or, in my sense, a resilience tip, because it's not just to sustain, but how do you prevent, how do you recover when disruptions are a must? It's going to happen.
Yeah.
How do you recover quickly and then thrive afterwards? So I think that the responsibility to develop this capacity, this funding capacity, is all of us. And I think we all can contribute because we all use the reality of climate change. Is we all are abusers.
Yes.
So we all should contribute.
But you were saying earlier, some of us abuse more than others. What if you're a polluter, but you're also a victim?
Right. So what do you do to assist in this regard? One, I think, is you can pay for each action. For example, every meal, for example, that you have is, if it's imported meat, if it's coming from another part of the world, there's a carbon footprint. And then how do you measure that? And then you apply a cess of perhaps 1 cent for every dinner. You know, every riverine experience that you go into, every zip liner that you take, every attraction that you go, you pay a 3% to 2%, as the case might be, and create a fund that, as a user, you can then build capacity to mitigate because you have a fund.
I see.
So you are a victim and you are also a user.
Yeah.
So in that sense, you are doing two things. You are trying to recover through your own efforts, and you're also saying to the rest of the world, who are the drivers of the heavy duty into your space, you have a responsibility to pay as well.
Okay. Edmund, thank you so much for coming in. That's Edmund Bartlett, who is Jamaica's Minister of Tourism. Thank you.